Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Productive Passions Podcast. Today's episode is an absolute treat. I had the joy of sitting down with a new friend, Dr. Callie Lance, chiropractor and owner of Chattanooga Sports Chiropractic Institute. Callie and I met during the grueling yet rewarding journey of training for and competing in an Ironman competition. And I'm so excited to share this fun and inspiring conversation with you. Callie is an absolute powerhouse of positivity and wisdom. In this episode, we dive into so many nuggets of insight that will leave you feeling energized and ready to take on the world. We talk about why doing hard things is the key to building confidence and proving to yourself what you're capable of. Callie reminds us that while we may not be the answer for everyone, we might just be a vital piece of someone's puzzle. This conversation is packed with empowering messages about trying new things to expand your world, being open to what others can teach you, and flipping seamlessly insurmountable challenges into opportunities by asking, why not me? And if you've ever doubted the connection between physical activity and mental wellness, Callie's insights on how physical exercise can create feel-good outcomes will have you lacing up your sneakers in no time. We also chat about how learning disabilities really can be transformed into superpowers and why the traits of endurance, tolerance, and resilience make endurance athletes some of the most successful business owners. And of course, Callie's call to be your own hype girl or hype guy is a call to kindness and self-belief we all need to hear. Whether you're an athlete, a business owner, or just looking for a little bit of extra motivation, this episode is for you. I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to thank Dr. Callie Lance and all the other Chattanooga triathletes who welcomed me into their tribe that weekend in September for some hilly bike riding and a fun Sunday morning swim down the Tennessee River. Dr. Callie Lance, thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Productive Passions. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
It is a pleasure having you. I will mention to the listeners that the way we met was doing something that's a lot of fun, that's a little challenging. I drove up to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where you are located, and was lucky enough to find out about this lovely group of triathletes that were training for the same race I was training for, which was Ironman Chattanooga. And you guys were kind enough to let me join in on a bike ride and then the next day a practice swim. And that's a big deal, especially the bike ride when you don't know how someone else rides, to let them join your group. That's pretty generous. So I will never forget that kindness that you guys showed me and letting me just hop right in and do, I don't know how many miles we did, 80 or so miles that day.
That was a blast. We loved having you. It was fun to have a newbie, so we could give you a little initiation ride to Chattanooga.
Boy, was it was good. It was very good. I want to back up a little bit and ask you to tell me about yourself, what it is that you do for a living.
I am a sports chiropractor, and I have my own business here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Chattanooga Sports Chiropractic Institute. And so it's a little bit of like all inclusive. I know a lot of people hear chiropractor and they're like, oh, you're just going to adjust and that's it.
My neck.
Yes. There's patients I don't even adjust. I am very in depth. I want to get to that root cause. I want to get you feeling better, and give you the tools for you to treat yourself, since you can't rely on me all the time. But so there's a lot of self-reliance back on the patient, but I'm there to give you strength training, dry needling adjustments, soft tissue. A lot of times, sometimes it's just a psychology appointment, a little mental health. But a little bit of everything all wrapped into one.
Yeah, I was looking at your website and I thought, I wonder how many people show up to your office to see you expecting a very passive treatment and kind of hoping for a feel good treatment. Do you run into that very often? And then what is the reality of a typical treatment?
That's a great question. I hope they don't come in thinking it's a passive treatment. I do a lot of passive because I'm very hands-on. I want to do a lot of soft tissue, actually touch the problem area. But I do have 3 rules in my office that I tell you on the first day. And rule is number 1, don't forget to breathe, because how many of us forget to breathe all the time or hold our breath and hold on to that tension? But number 2 is I'm heavy-handed. So when I'm doing soft tissue, we're touching the problem and we're getting to it. So I say I'm heavy-handed and let me know if it's too much. And then rule 3 is doing your home exercises, because I can only rely on the hour or 30 minutes that you're with me. I can't do the other 23 hours of the day. That is all your responsibility.
And that is a challenge. And I understand from my previous professional role as an occupational therapist that the bane of our existence is somebody who expects you to fix them and not do the homework that's necessary to complement what you're doing, and then to maintain those gains achieved in the treatment session. So I feel your pain, sister.
Right. Which is why my motto is empower your athlete within, or empower the athlete within, because it's you empowering yourself to be that athlete, whatever level that may be.
So part of the reason that I'm talking to you today is I talk to people who were brave enough to put their passions to work for them, or who are considering doing that, or somewhere along the journey of taking a chance on themselves and doing what they love to do. So I wanted to ask you, how would you describe yourself?
Oh, that's funny, because I was actually just talking to a patient about this this morning, just because they called me intense, and they're like, oh, I forget the full wording that they use, but I was like, I kind of like intensity better than what I'm normally referred to as is intimidating. So they're like, yeah, your intensity comes from a place of kindness, of wanting to help, versus being intense of trying to be like at a higher step than someone else, if that makes sense. And I was like, oh, that's actually I like that. But along those lines, I do have very high standards. I want everyone to be at their best. One of my favorite jokes is from Mean Girls, where it's like, I'm a pusher. I push people because I do. I want you to achieve those goals that you think are absolutely impossible, because I've done that to myself, and I've seen the growth and capabilities that I've been able to achieve, and I want everyone else to have that opportunity.
What is a little known fact about you?
Oh, that's a hard one. I know I always ask my patients on the first appointment, give me a fun fact about yourself. And all of them are like, I don't have anything fun. And now tables have turned and I'm like,
So you never thought about it yourself?
A little, right? Well, I have a fun fact, but a little known fact.
Give me their fun fact.
Okay. A fun fact. Well, I have a handful, but I hate when food touches. Like,
oh gosh,
I've gotten so many joke things of like the plates, like from elementary school, that are the dividers. And I'm like, that's literally the best gift you could ever give me.
You're like, that didn't insult me at all.
I'm grateful. I love it. Yeah. So that's kind of like my fun fact. I hate when food touches.
I'm the exact opposite. I mix everything together. So you would probably be like, oh my gosh,
I can't do that.
What are you doing to your food? You're butchering it. I've heard you talk about changing your mindset during a race to get through the exhaustion. Does this also apply to what you do professionally or personally to get through hard things?
Yes, in a different way. I definitely think triathlon goes a lot into or converts, or even endurance running, whatever, especially with a business owner.
How does that relate?
There's so much behind the scenes that I feel like a lot of people that don't own a business don't realize. Most of us are working, granted, if you have better life boundaries than I do, you're not working 24/7, but at the same time, there's always something going on in your head, an idea that you've been thinking of. For me, it might be a patient that I'm like, I cannot figure out where this piece of the puzzle fits, but it's definitely a key factor. So along those lines, within endurance sports, you have to be able to change your mindset of, okay, I'm not going to figure this out, or this plan isn't working, and now I have to shift and not necessarily go on the fly, but either ask someone for help or, okay, well, let's try and adapt to this capability. Would this aspect work, without looking at it as a failure and looking at it as another pathway or another route, instead of, oh, well, this failed, I'm done.
Is that a conscious thing?
It's more of an adaptability.
Is that a conscious thing for you, where you go, okay, wait a minute, that's not working. I need to shift the way I'm thinking about this or the way that I'm seeing this? Is that something that you're cognizant of, or does that just happen?
A little bit of both, depending on the difficulty, I would probably say, as well as the feedback. I always need a lot of communication from my patients, but it's a little bit of both. Or I might see something else and I'm like, okay, well, this works, but this, if we fine tune it, then we might be able to make it work better in this realm of, oh, they said this today that they haven't told me before. Oh, that sparks a whole different thought process. So a little bit of both.
I heard in an interview with you that you talk about having ADHD and
dyslexia.
You know what? That's funny. Not funny that you have that, but funny. I also suffer.
Gifted.
Yes. And I sort of pause and stutter a little bit because it's a challenge, right? It's a real challenge to learn. I heard you talk about that too, how you have to learn differently and how frustrating it can be. But I wanted to hear from you. What are the benefits that you've experienced having had to work harder? And I ask you this because I know our listeners, there are some who experience the same thing and feel very frustrated about the amount of time or to learn, or the amount of extra work to put into trying to learn something that it seems like everybody else is picking up like this. Have there been benefits to that challenge of taking longer and more effort to learn?
Well, that's a great question. And honestly, that the way you asked that really put some light bulbs in my head. So it took me a while to realize how I learned or what was my best way to learn. And I know they talk about that in school of like auditory, visual, kinesthetic, whatever. But most schools are visual and auditory. And I'm a kinesthetic learner. And I have to be hands-on. I was
going to ask what that meant.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. It's kinesthetic is like doing or performing hands-on. And so that's how I learned. So I either had, if it was like a lot of notes, I had to rewrite my notes. And everyone makes fun of me because I have a colored pen addiction. But I had to do it because that's how that stuck in my head. Was each line had to be a different color or like different topics, different colors. And that's how I put it all into my head. But yes, it has definitely been a benefit because it goes hand in hand with my job. I'm very kinesthetic. I learn by touch, and my job is touch and being able to put things through ranges of motion. Anatomy is one of my it was one of my hardest classes, but it ended up being something that I tutored other students in, and it is the whole route of my job. And so I can actually be able to touch that muscle and be like, oh, this is this, and that brings the whole cycle of what that muscle does or whatever I'm trying to do with it. So yes, it is so frustrating because you watch all these other people and they can pick it up and especially memorize things, since I feel like a lot of test taking is memorization.
And anatomy especially. I mean, come on. all those
Yes.
muscles, origin, insertion, action, nerve. And actually, I think they call it proximal and distal insertion now. But yes, there's a lot
Yeah.
of them. And I'm going through, like,
I get
I'm
that.
remembering that. That was my challenge class too. And I love anatomy. I mean, it's so cool. But
Yes.
when you think about it from a perspective of memorization, it's really hard. But you probably found some tricks
Yes.
that went, wait, if I don't
Yes.
try to memorize it, but I think about where it is and when that thing contracts, what happens, it makes it
Yes.
more alive, right?
Realistic.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So definitely, which also for anatomy, they took off spelling points all the time. And of course, with
Really?
dyslexia, that was
That's
the hardest
not
thing
fair.
ever.
That is not fair.
But it taught me you need to learn how to spell. And that's kind of where some of the cross patterns happen. But it is frustrating, but it also gives you a level up because it makes you find out more about yourself in a way that will help you progress in the long term.
So how does that relate to your profession? Not how you do it, but you have a pretty successful chiropractic practice, correct?
I like to think so. We're going to be in business 7 years in March. So,
And
yes.
so I'm guessing, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe when you were younger, you felt like you weren't so smart because everybody else was learning really fast and you were really struggling. Would that be fair?
Yes and no. Luckily, I am gifted. I am pretty smart, but I was very smart in science, and that was about it.
Well, let me clarify for a minute, because I don't want to suggest that being dyslexic means that you're not smart, because as we've learned, Einstein himself was dyslexic. So it's not that people with dyslexia aren't smart. In fact, a lot of times it's the opposite. But going through it, again, I can only speak for myself. I always felt like I was not as smart, even though, like you said, I was gifted. But for me, it was English and social studies and some of those kinds of classes. But I thought I wasn't smart because it took me so much longer to get a concept. So I wanted to just clarify that, because it's, it was something even to this day that I'm sensitive about. Even when I went to college, I did not tell my professors that I tested, actually on the recommendation of an earlier professor. They didn't find out till I was in college and had a 4.0 average that I was dyslexic.
Yep.
One of my professors very kindly came to me and said, have you ever been tested for dyslexia? You just seem to work really hard to get to where all the other students were. And I was quite insulted, I will say. But
understandable.
But grateful to her. I went and was tested. And then I didn't share it with other professors until another professor came to me and said, do you have a learning disability? Again, I was insulted, but she was very good. And I said, yes. And she said, why haven't you shared that with us? And I said, because I didn't want you guys to think I was stupid. And she said, shame on you, the career that you're going into, that you would say that. So my whole point in all of this is just to encourage people who may have some sort of learning disability, that doesn't mean that you're dumb, number one, and it doesn't mean that you can't be successful and start your own successful business. You're an example of someone who has done that.
Yes. It gives you a different lens to see things through. So yes, especially in a school setting where it's so structured, where a lot of people might advance faster than you, but you're seeing the problem or the lesson in a different point of view. So you might come to a different outcome that is not necessarily better, but you just take a different pathway. You take the path less traveled, right? So with mine, I was very gifted in science, and that because it's hands-on, right? You're doing the experiments and that kind of stuff, and seeing the results right in front of you, versus where I struggle is math and English, but math, because I switch everything around. And so one of my things when I got to starting my own business, it was get rid of what is not your strong suit that will bring you down. So immediately found a CPA and a bookkeeper, because I knew those were my two biggest struggles and would take the most of my time. And so I wanted those off my plate so I could still excel at what I would do best.
I've learned that you don't have to be the best at everything. In fact, if you, to your point, are able to bring somebody in who is good at that, then it allows you to spend your time doing other things and being creative or spending more time with patients, whatever that is. So finding people who complement what you're good at so that you can have greater bandwidth to continue to create good things or provide more care for individual patients.
It's kind of like finding your niche. I know we talked about it a lot in chiropractic school, and I don't know if they did that in occupation school, where a lot of times it's like, well, I can treat anyone. And yes, you can, but what's going to be more exciting to come to work? Do you want to treat that? And I know most people go to athletes. So I'm going to use that as an example, as I specialize in athletes, but what makes you that special, or why is that your niche? What do you bring different to the table that other practitioners might not see? Or what will bring that athlete to you to relate better to you, if that makes sense?
I wanted to ask you about something else I had heard you talk about before you even signed up for an Ironman. And let's back it up for a minute for people who don't know what an Ironman is. It is a triathlon. And do you want to talk about what are the distances? First of all, it's a triathlon. So what is a triathlon?
A triathlon is swim, bike, run. And there are different distances. And for a full Ironman, it is a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, and then a 26.2 mile run. So 140.6 miles. And you have usually 17 hours, but for Chattanooga, they like to be special. You only have 16 and a half hours to finish.
And Chattanooga is a special course, isn't it?
Yes.
It's different.
Chattanooga likes to be different.
And we know both Callie and I completed the 2024 Chattanooga Ironman. And to their credit, they were able to pull it off in spite of a hurricane. And in spite of, I think, 6 weeks or so before the race, one of the counties that had the bikes come through said, not this year. So they had to create a whole new bike course. So it was definitely a special Ironman and a wonderful one. But now back to what I was going to ask.
Adaptability and flexibility are key in life.
That's right. And it had to be that day because we all got up. We had heard that the swim was going to be canceled. And indeed, it was canceled because it was not safe. And so you have to adapt. Okay, now what does your day look like? Now, do you need to do something different with your nutrition? Lots of things, just mentally preparing. It sounds like, oh, good, it's going to be an easier day. But when you've planned and you have your bags out for each of those things to transition, it's a shift. Before you did the Ironman, somebody encouraged you or suggested that you try. And I had heard your response, but I'd like for you to share with the listeners, what was your response when somebody suggested you ought to sign up for this 140.2 mile race? So I'm sorry. Don't.
Yeah, don't limit yourself, girl.
Man, that 0.4 of a mile. Whew, that's big.
Up Barton. They'll let you
Yeah,
know real
so
quick.
what she's talking about is the road you run up. So if you're ever in Chattanooga, Tennessee, go visit Barton. That's just one of the uphills that you get to do multiple times during the race. But tell me about what somebody
Yes.
suggested for the first time, that you sign up and give the full Ironman a try.
Yeah. I had always been an athlete my whole life. I soccer, volleyball. I was a big swimmer, grew up on the water, one of my favorite things. Um, I I did some biking, but never fully, and I hated running. And so when I was a lifeguard and I worked with an Ironman, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna go out and train." I was like, "What? Why would you do that?" And I was like, "Well, I'll swim with you, but I'm not doing anything else with you." And she was like, "No, you should really do it and look into it. And it's so much fun. You learn a lot. It's a really big challenge." I was like, "There's no way in the world I would be able to get myself to do that." Funny enough, later on down the road, when I was in chiropractic school, I was at my most unhealthiest I've ever been in my life because of the stress. And I was like, if I'm going to talk the talk, I better be walking the walk of getting healthy and taking care of myself. And at that point in time, I was living in St. Louis. And so I was like, you know what? Let me look into this triathlon thing. I think it's something I could do. And that's when I completed my first triathlon, and it was a sprint
And so
distance.
what's a
So that
sprint
is like a
distance?
400 yard swim, I think, 12-mile bike, and then a 5K run, or 3.1 mile running. Um, and I successfully completed it and was like, oh my God, what did I just do? After that, I was able to move to Chattanooga, and that's when I opened up my practice and I joined the triathlon club here, um, to get inundated and meet new people and kind of stay along the lines of doing the sprints, maybe look at an Olympic, which is like double the sprint distance.
And I have
And
to
then
say, I'm
I got
smiling
to
because I know what happens next. I know how the story goes.
it's the gateway drug. And I have a couple amazing patients that were like, you could just do the half Ironman. It's in May, like no big
And
deal.
no
And I was
big
like,
deal.
well,
A
I'll
half
work
a
it.
half Ironman is
It's
70.3.
70.2 miles, three. There it
70.3.
is. 1.2 mile swim, 56-mile bike, 13.1 miles running. And I was like, are you insane? There's no way. I'll work the tent. And so that first year, I worked with some massage therapist friends of mine, and I worked the after the Ironman massages, where the athletes can go and get some soft tissue work on done. And I got to see all of the different people that crossed that finish
So let's
line,
talk about it.
especially some of the.
Let's talk about the different people. How did you know they were different?
Well, they were 80 years old, and I was like, what? You just crossed a finish line doing 70 miles, and you have what, 8 hours to finish in, and you're 80 years old and you're crushing
No
it.
excuse.
And yeah, I was like, okay, if you can do it. And they're like, yeah, just a step at a time. And I was like, you're right. It really is just a step at a
All
time.
shapes and sizes, all ages, wheelchairs, scooter. I don't know what they call them. I apologize for anybody who uses the walking aids to do the running. All kinds of strengths and differences that complete these things. You're right. It's like, why not me?
Exactly. I was like, if they can do it, I can do it. And so then I got into it, and I was like, well, if I can do a half, that's like the most I'll ever be able to do in my life. And so I stuck with half. I completed my first half Ironman, and that was probably, I think that was more surprising than opening my own business, to
Oh,
be honest
wow.
with you. Mainly because my goal of life was to be a doctor and have my own practice. So when I achieved that, it wasn't super shocking because that was always my goal. But when I completed a half Ironman of something I never thought was possible for myself, I was shocked. And then you get the gateway drug, and I was like, you know what? I think I can do a full. after, and especially being here in Chattanooga, where we're lucky enough to have the half and the full
Right.
Ironmans, you go out there and volunteer, and you get to hear some of the stories. You get to meet some of these amazing athletes. Like I got to meet you, and hearing their stories, and they inspire you, especially when you're out at the 11 p.m. and you're seeing people walking the whole marathon. And you're like, if they can do that and cross the finish line, I can do that. What kind of journey can I learn about myself by completing a full Ironman? How can I push my limit?
You and I are talking about triathlons racing, especially the Ironmans, or there's other long distance triathlons as well. But I think that applies to anything that is that hard, that on first exposure to it, you think, not me, I can't do that. And then you do. How is that, being able to accomplish that, led you to maybe doing some other things, or just how you feel about who you are?
That's a little shock. That's a loaded question, but it has taught me a lot, but it also has made me be a better practitioner. And that's how I got into more specializing in endurance athletes, especially because I went through that's insane. Why would anyone want to do that? To doing it and realizing how underserved the endurance population really is in a medical setting, because most of the time the treatment plan is rest and stop doing what you're doing. When in reality, a lot of times you have to either add in strength training, stretching, or we have to change your form just a little bit, or we have to change the mileage. You might have gone out too far, too fast, whatever it may be. But being able to realize and serve these athletes, that a lot of them are doing it because they want to challenge themselves, or a lot of it's mental health aspects as well, which one of the reasons I did it. And to be able to help them get back to what brings them peace, calmness, relaxation into, and be able to be better at their jobs, or be a better mother, father, spouse, or just a better person in general, is so powerful and rewarding to be able to be that resource.
So what was it that Ironman did for you personally?
One of my big things in my journey, I guess you could say, is learning to be my own hype girl. I am selfishly amazing at helping others and being able to be their cheerleader and seeing the bright side of things for them. But when it comes to looking in the mirror, I am very good at looking at the dark side, or looking at the insecurities or the weaknesses. And I realized how much that brought me down and was so toxic that I was like, I need to do something and surprise myself of, yeah, you might be a bigger girl, but you just did 140 miles. You are strong. You are strong. 6. Yes. You are strong. Look at what your body allowed you to do. Look at what your spirit allowed you to do, rather than always being like, well, you're not fast. You're not up to that capability, or you're not going to podium. And instead of it looking at that way, which a lot of sports take you down that route, looking at it as, I can't believe I just did that. That's so badass.
It really is in doing hard things that you gain some confidence, and not just to boast, or to wear a medal, or to hang up a medal, but to prove to yourself, or to show yourself what you are capable of. Because you're right, we are our own worst critics. Sometimes the things that we say to ourselves, there's no way we would say that to someone else, or tolerate anybody else speaking to someone in that manner. Who has been the most influential person in your life, and do they know it?
I don't know if I've ever really thought of that, because I feel like there's multiple, and I love to sit back. This sounds like such a creeper, but I love to sit back and watch. I like to observe and listen to people's stories and learn from them, no matter who they are or what they do. But I like to pick and choose from the lessons or from their experiences, and then being able to go, oh, well, I like that, or that's amazing. I want to do that. So I don't know if there's been one specific super influencer in my life. I love to always be learning. So I'm always looking for opportunities to learn something else from someone.
That sounds really smart to me, actually. And interestingly, I was talking with my husband and a couple other people recently that there are so many voices out there, right? Influencers and people that are promising you that they're going to bring you this or this, whatever that is. And initially, I was super annoyed with that. And then I thought, well, there are so many different voices. But if you connect with one of those voices and not with the other ones around you, then that's benefited you. So if there's a particular style or a presentation of something that you need to learn, that you need to take away from, then there's no harm in that. So kudos to you to being open to learning from all that you come in contact with, or that comes into contact with you. On the show, we talk about going through really tough times that feel insurmountable when they happen, but ultimately shape who we are or where we are now for the better. I call these personal propellants. They propel me forward, even though I didn't know at the time that would be the outcome. Do you have an example of that in your life?
Probably COVID, honestly. I was starting my third year of practice. So still so new. Actually, let me take you back a step further. So, like I had mentioned earlier, that I always wanted to be a doctor and have my own practice. I thought it was a vet at first, and then I realized that you have to also put the animals down, and I can't do that. So I pivoted, and especially since I was an athlete my whole life, I went to a handful of physical therapists, and watching what they did for a living inspired me, because I was like, I know I can't do a desk job. There's absolutely no way. Also goes back to the ADHD.
Totally.
I was like, I have to be active. I want to be hands-on. I love the science aspect of things.
And you're such a people person.
And thank you. But also being able to help people reach their goals, right? And do the things that they want to do. And so with that, I went all the way through college thinking I was going to be a physical therapist. Graduated, applied to 23 or 25 different physical therapy schools, and got waitlisted from all of them because it's such a competitive schooling. But there was also some little nuggets in there or flags, if you will, where I started picking up on things of like, maybe this isn't my right route. And one of them, and I hope no one takes offense to this, but you have to shadow to be able to apply to physical therapy school. And while I was observing, and as I said, I love to observe and pick up on different things, but I was so bored. I felt as in that they were following directions, but they weren't even having a lot of their own creativity and freedom. So it was almost like a factory where it was like down the chain, and everyone was getting the same thing for the same symptoms. When I was like, those were very different mechanisms of injury. Why are they getting the same exercises? Also, why haven't you put your hands on them? I was like, you haven't even touched the patient. And that was not my experience when I had physical therapy. So I was so blown away of a handful of these, because I went to different places to shadow, that it was very cookie cutter. And I was like, this is terrible. I don't like that at all. And one, for my mental stimulation, but most importantly for the patient, they're not getting what they need to get out of this. And there was a couple other things. So I thought I was going to do strength and conditioning coaching because I did that throughout college, for another college that was around for internship stuff. But I knew I wouldn't be fully fulfilled, even though that was a stepping stone. I knew not being a doctor would limit me. And so my sister was a chiropractor in chiropractic school at that point in time. And she was like, you should really try chiropractic. And I was like, absolutely not. I'm not following in your footsteps.
I also get that.
I do not want to be in your shadow. I've been in your shadow the entire life, being your sister or the younger sister, you know, and I want to find my own pathway. But then watching and observing the different types of chiropractic, as well as the wide scope of practice that chiropractors have, you can focus in on so many different niches while still being a portal of entry care physician and having a lot more freedom or creativity within the patient scope, that you can help them a little bit more than giving a script or here's 3 exercises, go do them. But no, I'm going to sit down and actually listen to the patient. No offense to any PTs or anyone else out there. Just this was my vibe that I wanted to go with. Sit down, get to the root cause, just listen to a patient. Half the time, that is the biggest thing you can do to help someone is listen to their story. And then actually get my hands on them. That releases hormones in general even a hug. And especially with our society being so social media driven and technology driven, the art of touch has been lost. And that is so powerful in a healing realm, let alone
we
just
could do
in general.
A whole other podcast on that. It was something that I actually used to teach while I was practicing. But it's true. It's so true. People need to be touched, and not just in a very mechanical way. So when I would teach caregivers how to turn, how to position in a wheelchair, how to do whatever, I would also say, you know, certainly depending on the relationship, but also like, have you lovingly touched this person? Even if you're a caregiver, you're not related, like a hand on the shoulder, or even somebody who's unresponsive, just like a stroke on the face. It's, you know, we did a lot of sensory stimulation kind of things, but you don't have to be a patient to need that. And you are so true. I'm not saying social media is bad by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
But we can't replace human interaction. Like, we're doing this virtually, but even in the in-person and just the human touch is so incredibly important. So, you know, totally not what we were going to talk about, but I'm glad it came up because I think that is so important. It's validating, it is caring, and it's appropriate when done appropriately. So I'm glad, I'm really glad that came up. A lot of my listeners are people who want to do something different. And the whole purpose for starting this podcast was for the individuals. And I don't mean a handful. So many people that I talked to that said, I hate what I do, or I want to do something different. How do you do something different? And so I always ask about naysayers, because a lot of times we are our biggest naysayer. We're the person talking ourselves out of doing something that's outside of our comfort zone. But in your journey, did you have any naysayers who said, you know, with your learning disability, chiropractic school is going to be really hard for you, or you should join an existing practice because starting your own practice is really risky and you're probably going to struggle more than you need to? Have you had naysayers throughout your journey? And if so, how did you overcome that?
Probably one of my biggest, when I was in chiropractic school, I specialized in athletes already. and went and did rotations at the Human Performance Center. So we got to go to Mizzou University, went to St. SLU University, as well as a couple other ones. But one of the biggest things, and where this stands out more, we went to powerlifting competitions. And my partners that I worked with were all male. And I was the only female within that rotation. There was a couple other females within, but I had males that wouldn't let me treat them because I was a female. And they were saying she would not be tough enough for her to get in on my muscles. Because I mean, they're big, even though I worked on D1 football players and they were fine with it. But some of the egos, right? And they're like, oh yeah, you won't be able to get deep enough, or da 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 da, or adjust me. And I was like, funny enough, most of my patients, like within chiropractic school, I would always go to the males to practice on. And that was just more my comfort zone. And especially like females that were really tiny and skinny, I felt like I was going to break them. So I avoided them. So I kind of did a little bit of the naysayer myself on other colleagues. But then when I started my practice, it was a very male dominated patient base that I didn't realize until someone was like, oh yeah, I want to send my wife in, but I think they'd be scared of you. And I was like, what? Not even realizing that I had taken that naysayer and turned it into my main patient base, because I was like, no, I'm strong enough to do that. Yeah. So that went like full circle. So I was like, oh yeah, that's a good answer to that question. Besides there's always naysayers, when, especially people wanting to bring you down a notch when you're passionate about what you do.
So how do you, when that happens, because that could really take somebody out of the game if they believe they really want to do something. And instead of having support, they have that, no, and it could be very well intentioned. Mm-hmm. How do you overcome that feeling of, oh gosh, it's not just me that thinks I can't. There are other people too.
There's a couple different ways to go about that. And I think it depends on the situation as well as the person, whether you want to use that as fuel on the fire. So fuel on the fire of using that, the no to say, watch me, or to take that and be like, is this really what I want to do? And actually have that sit down conversation with yourself of, well, if other people don't think I can do it, why? Why not? And truly ask yourself those questions, and then go through of, well, are you passionate about this? Is this something that lights the fire in you, that you're going to want to get up and go to work every day and maybe even fight that battle every day? Is that something that you're willing to do? Or what is the true passion that you're looking for, that you would be willing to have those fights?
Along your journey, what has been the most disappointing thing that you've encountered?
Not being the answer to everyone's problem.
Oh gosh. Wow, that's good. How did you respond to that when you kind of were like, maybe I'm not it for everybody?
Very hard. Signed up for multiple Ironman in a year.
That's how you dealt with it? No, gosh, I get that. I get that. Yes, because you did not just one, you did two. That's really hard. But is that your outlet, is go out and do something very physical, very hard?
Very much so. Because it forces myself to have conversations in my head. But learning that it's okay to not be the answer to everyone, because you might have a piece of the puzzle, and that's why they were led to you, that you can get them, you're not the answer, but you can get them to the proper place, or you can at least be a little light in the life to maybe spark a little fire within them.
Gosh, I really like that. So even if you're not the answer, you might be part of an answer, or you still might have really important stuff to contribute for them.
A cookie for the appetizer, a little treat.
I like that. Okay, well, now let's talk about the opposite. What has been the best or most surprising thing that's happened along your journey from student to doctor or from athlete to Ironman athlete?
See, now that question is very hard for me because I am so bad at looking at the good things. And as you could tell with the bad question, I had
Dr.
answers.
Callie, I thought,
When you ask me about
I
the good
thought,
things, I don't
I
know.
thought it was going to be obvious that I have been the best thing. No, I'm totally kidding.
Absolutely. But you're right. You are right. Meeting so many different people and so many different walks of life and learning so many different stories or watching people grow or helping them achieve those goals that they thought were unrealistic or unachievable for them to do, and being able to be a part of that journey and a stepping stone to get them there, but also just meeting a ton of different people and different walks of life that live all over the
You
world.
know, I'm going to try and sum up what you said. Tell me if you agree with this. That trying something
Mm-hmm.
new really opens up your world.
Yeah, 100%.
And I don't know about you, but for me, you're right. It's meeting people from all over and the surprises that that brings, like meeting you and Johnny and Blair
Yeah.
and Michael and all of these people who welcomed me, and that now I've stayed connected with. Not, it's not like we have a conversation every single day, but we stay connected. And it's
Yep.
interesting that you also care. You also care about these people that you've connected with. So maybe sort of the lesson out of that is being willing to try something new, even when it's scary. It is scary, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, God, yeah. I know. I'm all. I always say, well, take the leap and hope the parachute opens. But just a little dark humor
No, it's
too.
the truth.
And at the same time, you never know who you're going to meet. That could be another stepping stone to endless opportunities.
Right. I did one of my first half Ironmans years and years ago. And I had a coach at the time, and I went by myself. One of my friends said, "You put your big girl panties on," because we would always go and
Yeah,
and
that's
so
a big step.
yeah, so going there and not having the support and of other people doing the same thing. I remember saying to my coach, "Oh my gosh, everybody here looks super strong. These are like real athletes, not like me." And he was kind of a tough love kind of person. And he was like, "You are there appropriately so. You are there because you earned it, you worked hard, and you are one of those people." And when he said that to me, I was like, wow, I didn't feel like I belonged. And when he said that to me, I was like, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I do belong. And that was very early in my triathlon career. So it meant something to hear that you belong. But if I had never taken that first step and gotten out of my comfort zone and tried swim, bike, run, put together in one day, I wouldn't have known that.
Right.
You and I wouldn't be having this conversation today. So you're right. You never know where it's going to take you, who you're going to meet, or what those connections might mean for you personally, professionally, however.
Be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes. What is next for you? You've done some really big things in your life. What's next?
Yeah. Honestly, I've been trying to figure out how to relax and not take so much onto my plate, but that is easier said than done.
Yes.
And I've noticed, I feel like a lot of things that I go through in life, it brings those kind of people to as my patients to teach me lessons. Besides the fact of helping them, but just, you peel the layers of the onion back and you take other tidbits from situations, but realizing how detrimental our high stress society is and realizing that I am most certainly part of that problem. I'm trying to walk my own walk from the talk I talk and find that relaxation and allowing myself to be bored. Not always having to have some kind of stimulation or, heaven forbid, go out and run a half marathon just because I'm bored, which I never thought would be words that cross my mouth, but allowing myself to sit in my thoughts or allowing myself to put the phone down, put the computer away, not having to work 24/7, not having to have stress about a notification because it has that little red dot. It drives me nuts. But yeah, so this year is all about finding either like a rejuvenation or relaxation within myself.
So yours is really about self-evolution.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
To be the best self for others.
I love that. Thank you so much for saying yes and joining me today. I really appreciate your time. And my goodness, it was a pleasure meeting you several months ago. And who knew that this is where we were going to land? But I'm so glad we did.
Me too. Thank you so much. I am so grateful to have met you and been able to share a handful of miles with you, as well as another Ironman completion. Congratulations to you
as well.
on that.
Yes.
Thank you. And I have a question for you. What's next for you? Since you asked me, what's next for you?
Wow. Lots of things unfolding, getting myself out of my comfort zone. And I am going to be putting on a retreat this year. And it's sort of what you were talking
so exciting
about, because suffering the same affliction of always having to have something to do and then the need for everybody to, not everybody, but the need for my spouse to know how busy I was and how much I've done and all of this, also the same thing, recognizing the importance of slowing down. We know it in training, right? We know we have to take rest so that our muscles can rebuild and we can get stronger. Isn't it funny that it works the same way? We have to take those breaks so that we can get stronger.
That's when the gains happen.
That's where the gains happen. So maybe you'll have to join me on a retreat this year.
Yeah, keep me updated. I would love to.
Good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for your time and having me on.
My pleasure. Don't forget to like, comment, and share if you enjoyed today's show. And don't miss out on future episodes. Visit productivepassions.com and drop your email address to get exclusive behind-the-scenes content and first access to our newest episodes and special events.